One of the best things about the Soulsborne series is how cool each game's world and level design are, and so today I'm going to rank them from worst to best. One thing to note is that I'm not counting any DLC as a separate world to rank, as instead I'll just take it into account for each game. As always, if you find this type of content entertaining, then make sure to subscribe, as it really helps the channel a lot, and let's get started. This is the least controversial placement on this video, and in my opinion is the obvious answer for last place. Demon's Souls comes up short a lot because of how outdated it is compared to every other game in the series, and while unique, the world design is absolutely the least interesting. Essentially, there are 5 worlds you can teleport to and explore, and I'd say each one is pretty linear. It's cool because after the first world you can go to any one that you want, but given how much interconnectivity works in these games, having every area so separate can feel really jarring. As for the areas themselves, I think they're fine, but nothing that blows me away. I also think the atmosphere on the remake, while it looks nice, isn't very defined and looks more generic than any other Soulsborne game. I'm sure the original is better in this regard, but I can't see anything coherent with the areas personally, which is why I think this is the worst in the series. Now, this is a hot take, but hear me out. Sekiro is an amazing game with the tightest and most polished mechanics in the series, as well as one of, if not the best lineup of bosses we've gotten so far. However, there is still a lot to criticize with Ashina's world design. Visually, I think it's fine, but there are higher highs in the series. My main issue is that traversing this world on a first playthrough is weirdly more unintuitive than ever. There were so many times where I just had no idea where to go or who to talk to, which wouldn't be as big of an issue except the places you explore feel artistically really repetitive and hard to be interested in. There was just never an area that made me stare in awe like the other games had, and I feel like this is because the colors were flatter than they should have been, and that creatively this game didn't do anything surprising. Again, this doesn't mean the world is bad, as I'd still say it's very good, but I have a lot more reason to enjoy the other Soulsborne worlds more. While I love Dark Souls 2, Draenleic and the way you progress in it isn't my favorite thing about the game. Every area is connected very well, and the atmosphere is top-notch, from things like sound design and graphical design, and the interconnectivity is also better than the last 2 games I mentioned, but I still think it's generally weaker for an interesting reason. Dark Souls 2 is technically the biggest and longest Souls game in the series in terms of main story, even more than Elden Ring. And so while the areas in this game are designed well, they aren't very memorable because of the quantity and how it doesn't feel like one area loops back to an older area very often. As for the game's DLC, I personally feel like these areas have a similar problem and feel more like a level than something natural. This one is really interesting. I was originally going to put Lothric lower because Dark Souls 3 is criticized for having some of the most bland areas in the series, and I agree to some extent. A lot of the areas are very gray and maybe visually uninteresting in the first half of the game, but in my opinion it makes up for this with a really successful atmosphere, and also really good level design. Besides the hub, the way the areas interconnect is really cool. Being able to see Lothric Castle from the high wall of Lothric at the very start of the game is such a cool feature, and is the type of thing I wish was in more Souls games. And also, the high wall of Lothric is one of the coolest starting areas in general. The DLC absolutely gets a knock though, because Ring City looking as cool as it is and then just being a poison swamp is really lame, even if the bosses are really good. And also, snow areas in Soulsborne games are mid. Easily one of the best worlds in the series, and I think you could argue that Lordran is the best in general. I certainly think that the level design is the best it's ever been, as there's a lot of iconic moments like the elevator from Undead Parish and Firelink Shrine, for example. It makes everything feel much more alive and memorable, rather than areas you're in for a bit and then forget about after you beat the game. And I think a huge reason for this is how you can't fast travel for the first half of the game, forcing the player to backtrack and unlock shortcuts more aggressively than any other game in the series. And I think it does a really good job of this. The atmosphere is also amazing, as I think this game feels a lot more suffocating and creepy in certain environments, and abnormally safe in others. The only issue I have with it is that the second half does unfortunately have a huge drop-off in terms of quality, and the areas are definitely affected by this. But other than that, it's perfect. The Lands Between is easily the hardest world to rank just because of how different it is from the rest of the series. Overall, the open world formula, when done right, is awesome. Of course, I still prefer linear games, but I have to admit that exploring in Elden Ring is better than it's ever been. And I think the constant rewards you get from this make it so worth it and the most fun game in the series. The visuals and art direction is also arguably the best it's ever been, and the only reason it isn't number one is because the biggest problem with an open world like this is the lack of atmosphere. This may sound crazy, but the way Dark Souls can make you feel trapped in an area has a lot to do with the fact that the game is so tiny. Whereas in Elden Ring, you can see everything all of the time. To be fair, this is very cool, but makes an area like Caelid, which is supposed to be scary, feel a lot less intimidating. I think a lot of you guys will disagree, but I think Yharnam is FromSoft's biggest achievement in terms of world building and level design. First of all, nothing beats the atmosphere in Bloodborne, as the constant creepy and on-edge vibe is so cool for a game like this. The areas are gorgeous a lot of the time, and again, besides the hub, interconnectivity is absolutely there. While there are definitely some bad areas, like the Nightmare Frontier, this game has so many areas like Cainhurst Castle with a really cool dark snow aesthetic, and an elevator creating a shortcut to an awesome boss, or the Upper Cathedral Ward, which is even missable, yet one of the most disturbing yet awesome areas in the game. It's also worth mentioning that the way Insight changes how Central Yharnam looks is one of the coolest things in the whole series, as I still remember the first time I learned that amygdalas were everywhere the whole time and you just couldn't see them. So there's plenty of things that make me replay Bloodborne, especially with how great the combat mechanics are, but the thing that really makes me keep coming back is definitely the world design.